Welcome back, everybody. Today, I want to take a note at how China's been celebrating its 70th birthday with the Communist Revolution. I've noticed some interesting things in the media lately, and it prompted me to investigate just how much they're trying to exert a soft power influence both in Western media as well as in their foreign interests around the world. What started this out for me today was actually listening the other day on NPR. My radio station, since I don't have Sirius XM or anything like that, I switch between two channels. I listen to my NPR station, then I'll flip over to conservative talk radio on the AM channels just so I can hear both sides lie to the American people. But it started with Elsa Chang early in the morning. She's one of the reporters at NPR. And I'll read you this line from her from the transcript I'm looking at right in front of me. And it says, "It's a party that promised to lift people out of poverty, which has done an absolutely spectacular job. In fact, it's lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, but at the same time, income inequalities have intensified over the last few decades. Part of our reporting out here has been trying to understand how these inequalities have played out over different generations within different classes of people." But I wanted to start with that line. It's done an absolutely spectacular job. Now, I'm not going to argue any kind of nativist language or anything else. Chang is an American. She's an American lawyer. She's now works for NPR. She has been for several years now. I'm not questioning her loyalties because of her name. I just found that line is interesting, which has done an absolutely spectacular job. Now, I'm not surprised. It's NPR. NPR is not well known for giving the most comprehensive or unbiased positions on the news, but it did get me thinking about how well China has been exerting itself on the global stage, both in American media as well as in the press around the globe. Now, this led me to an article from the National Interest, and again, links in the description below if you're interested in what I've been reading. This came from the National Interest. It's a really great site for having some analysis on foreign affairs, security, as well as taking a look at there. This was from September 19th, 2019, so this is relatively recent. China is waging a silent media war for global influence. It's a soft power arms race, and the writer's Daniel Wagner, or Wagner, depending on how he pronounces it here. But the Chinese Communist Party has rapidly expanded its efforts to influence discussions about China beyond its borders to attempt to suppress criticism and make international media refer to China in a positive light. And he notes that in 2018, Xinhua, or I probably am butchering the hell out of that, China's largest state-run news agency, announced that it was expanding cooperation with the U.S. news service, the Associated Press, the AP. Xinhua declared that the two news agencies had established broad cooperation in areas such as news media, economic information, and the application of artificial intelligence. Now, this is scary for two reasons. One, it means that the Associated Press can't be trusted anymore. But secondly, it's because China is already beginning to exert itself on what comes out of the newswire. This means that China is going to have a much easier time when it comes to reporting on internal affairs. So if China wants to accurately, give its own propaganda out there, working with the Associated Press is very easy to do so, because the AP is one of the fastest news outlets out there when it comes to getting information out on the wires. I would argue that Thomson Reuters is the second one when it comes to getting information out there. But Wagner continues, arguing, at the time, U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission warned that Xinhua was rapidly expanding globally in an effort to discredit Western media outlets. The AP maintained, in response to a congressional inquiry on the scope of the agreement between the two companies, that Xinhua would not influence its reporting or have access to sensitive information in the AP's possession. Now, I find that incredibly hard to believe, for two reasons. One, when it's talking about new media and the application of artificial intelligence. There's a reason why the U.S. has essentially kicked Huawei and other Chinese applications of 5G out of the country. We are not going to allow a backdoor for China to have access to American data, intellectual property, or other trade secrets of American businesses as well as our own government. But now you add into the Associated Press as one of the largest news corporations out there that gets the news out fast and relatively accurately. China now has access to information on a global scale, giving them understanding of how the AP's reporting is going to be shaped and allowing them to exert their influence to do the exact same, putting China in a more positive light. Now, this is incredibly worrisome, and we really need to be concerned. Now, this this is the same thing here when we're talking about if this were Russia, this would be a totally different story. There would be absolute outrage that if something like Sputnik or Russia Today, RT, would be partnering with a major U.S. news corporation like Reuters or the Washington Post, there would be absolute clamoring. But because it's China, it's absolutely different. And I think that that's the really biggest problem that we have here. Our relationship is so symbiotic, but at the same time so incredibly toxic and dangerous to American national interests. China has this opportunity to present itself in its own image and propagandize, trying to keep certain facts hidden. The media clampdown that it has on Hong Kong within its own country, as well as what it's been doing to Muslims and other minorities inside its country, is absolutely terrifying. We're only becoming aware of some of the things that China is getting away through, either through drone footage or from those who are willing to speak out and risk their own lives. And so that's really what concerned me with Elsa Chang's comment, that it's done a spectacular job. I feel as if the Chinese have really been putting themselves out there and talking about how wonderful they are in the world. In fact, even their own state media has been going out there explaining that they're on the progress for equality and that they're moving forward with the world and ahead and pushing forward for all aspects of progress. Now, and I think it's funny because here we are discussing the same sort of issues and debates on what's the best pathway forward. But right now, China seems to be celebrating its 70th anniversary, saying that it is the true vision for progress. Not to mention that it's currently engaging in the second form of the rape of Africa. I mean, Europe may no longer be doing it because it's not the 1800s anymore, but China's doing it now, fighting for influence and, control over vast, important resources such as rare earth minerals, oil, and other strategic assets inside these sub-Saharan African region, directly in combat with American interests in the area, fighting off against Islamic extremism. But the United States is not engaging in the same level of foreign direct investment that China has. China has invested billions of dollars into Africa in the past. In doing so, they are trying to build up the successful, economic cooperation, getting African countries dependent upon the Chinese currency, making sure that trade blocs exist within there, and continuously exerting its influence geopolitically to have a lot of America's allies cut off from its long-standing colonial past. This puts China in a better position to put pressure on Europe and, through an extension, the United States. Again, links in the description below to these articles. But I mean, it also shows that we've seen that despite their best efforts, more or less the free press in the West, if we can call it that anymore, with the amount of legalized propaganda that exists thanks to the National Defense Authorization Act. But ironically enough, I want to take a look at what The Guardian published. It was on the 23rd of September, 2019, talking about the Uyghurs. They are a minority group inside China. I believe they are of the Islamic faith. I'm not 100% sure. Now, there was drone footage that was captured by, I think it was released from the Australians, showing thousands of blindfolded, Uyghurs in blue uniforms, blindfolded, heads shaved, being put on a train station somewhere west of Korla in southeast Xinjiang in August of last year. So this is old footage, but it was published recently. And so China may be trying to put a positive spin on themselves, arguing things for gender equality, that they've lifted millions out of poverty, but I think it's time that the world really begins to call out China for what it was. I mean, we have presidents in the past that claimed that they held on to this Wilsonian idealism for what the world should be. But I mean, if that's the case, then the United States could really win some points with the global leaders, even with Trump as president, if we reasserted our focus on human rights. While he may not be winning the trade war on economic terms entirely, I mean, farmers and manufacturing are hurting because of the tariffs, but it is exposing a weakness in China's export-dependent economy. I think that he could really win back a lot of political clout if he started focusing on the issues inside China domestically. If he said, look, there are millions of people over the age of 65 with no social safety net. I think I'd have to bring out the statistics, but the last time I took a look at this, it was saying that there's a population equal to the United States, so about over 300 million people over the age of 65 that are, with no social safety net, no kind of benefits, and their parents are forced to, their parents or grandparents or even great-grandparents, and their children and their progeny have to, keep them afloat, otherwise they're in abject poverty, and we're seeing this homelessness crisis. you see these cities that are, built overnight where entire farming communities and rural centers are forced then to move in there and become developed, even though, they've been moved from their homes and ancestral lands that they may have had, ties to for untold centuries. So this propaganda that China's been putting up on itself, illustrating that, we've raised millions out of poverty, that communism is the way to succeed, our state-owned enterprises are fantastic, we have the opportunity to be the, solution to the United States' retreat and withdrawal from the world. I think Trump could easily counter not only with the trade war, but easily fight back and get European allies on board when he starts talking about what's happening with the Uyghurs, what's happening inside Hong Kong. I know that China makes up a huge portion of the global economy, but if the world wants to stand for these Western liberal values when they're bickering amongst themselves about their own domestic parties, I think they need to look up and realize that the threat that exists to their forms of democracy and our beliefs and our values in this classically liberal sense is the totalitarian regime that we've become entirely dependent on economically. They're continuing to spend billions of dollars in research and development in their military. They're getting close to rivaling the United States in military prowess. The expansion of these artificial islands to act as their own island-hopping strategy with their military, and specifically their Navy and Air Force, as they begin to exert influence over, the Asiatic bloc that the United States has established strong relationships with. It's incredibly concerning. And so, while Elsa Chang may be a complete, this may have been a goof, this may have been a mistake, I think it is entirely possible that there is a significant amount of Chinese influence in the media. We already see what's currently going on with the Associated Press. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that exists with NPR as well. I'm not saying that this is any kind of conspiracy, but there is documented evidence that China has taken necessary steps to put itself out there and to put a positive spin on the world. And what better place to do that than with some of the largest media companies and news outlets inside the United States, places like the Associated Press, places like National Public Radio, that for many of Americans, they do get their news from there. They donate to NPR, they listen to what the Associated Press has to say because it provides their breaking news, they'll follow them on Twitter. But now it requires us, both as Americans and just everywhere else in the world, to be just a little more skeptical when we take a look at reporting that may have come from the Chinese government or Chinese government figures. But again, overall, I think that Elsa Chang may have just goofed with her NPR, Morning Edition report. But I think it's entirely concerning that, one, you let your bias out, and that, two, that China is beginning to put a vast spread of influence in American media and media across the globe. So, like I said, links in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, be sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to engage in this conversation. I'll probably come back to more in depth. I'll probably make a full-length video on what China's been doing and its media and propaganda machine across the world. But until then, I'll see you tomorrow, and you guys have a good evening.